I'm sure you love capitalism too, right?
No.
You don't love capitalism?
No, sorry.
Really?
I'm anti-capitalist.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Are you serious? You're
Do you know what
anti-cap?
capitalism is?
Of course I am one.
What is it?
Well, the main thing about capitalism versus socialism is private property. And you know that, right?
That's the problem.
And private property is the problem?
Oh, yeah.
And the profit is the problem? That's another issue?
Well,
with,
yeah, I mean, it's people... The idea that you can just say something is yours, like say oil, say land, that comes from the earth and has possession, property is an illusion. There is no such property. You don't retain
Really?
it after you die. It's still there, but you are not. So you can't say you claim anything but your own body.
Consulting company,
Well,
for example.
I mean,
Is it a property? Is it a business that works for profit?
well, exactly. They all work for profit. They take
yeah,
the resources
but
of
it's
the
a-
earth
but it's
for
a pro-
themselves
but it's a
and make
private
profit off
I
of
mean,
it.
consulting. There's nothing to do with Earth. It's consulting. Let's say, I
Well,
know.
you're talking about finance capital.
No, just consulting. Let's say, I'm consulting you on climate change.
Okay.
I might get paid for it. I don't, but I might have, right?
Yeah.
So I'm making money by just blah 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 talking,
Yeah.
and I set up the company, and I make profit by just blah 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 talking.
But I mean,
So that's right. In USSR, the country that I came from, it would have been possible. You cannot do it. You cannot make money. Period. Full stop.
I mean,
You cannot make
let
money.
me clear this thing up. USSR was never a socialist country.
What's
I mean, socialism at its core is workers' management of the means of production.
and how
What
is how,
happened at Russia
Uh-huh.
was state capitalist. That means the
There's
government
no
owned-
capitalism is
that was the state owned everything and they
Correct.
distributed. So that means it's
Correct.
state capitalism.
no, it's not capitalism.
They own
It's
it.
state, but not capitalism. I'll help you. There's another word for it. What was in the society? What's socialism? Socialism has never existed in any country in the world,
No, socialism
and never
has
will.
existed.
Now, in the USSR, we'll get to that in a second. But in the USSR, we had a totalitarian regime or dictatorship.
No, I'm not debating
Right?
that.
Okay. So, but there's
it's
no.
not socialist.
No, it's not.
USSR
No,
was never
no, of
socialist.
course not. Never was, and never will. Just like no other country. But now getting
Well,
to
no, there
you
have
saying
been
that,
socialist experiments throughout history. I mean, a good example of actual workers managing the means of production is 1936 in Spain in Catalonia, when the peasants and the workers, the uprise, they completely eliminated the state and they resumed production by themselves. Workers, there were no managers. The workers themselves managed production and they managed, make food. They managed to make. They managed to
And
make
what
a whole
happened
bunch
to
of
it?
stuff.
Why didn't
Well,
this
the
experiment
problem
succeed?
is the Stalinists, the Social Democrats in the United States and Europe, and the fascists all combined because they were so scared of that. They combined to crush the anarchists in 1936. So it was mostly the communists, the state communists, who betrayed the anarchists, the libertarian socialists. But the very fact that these people managed to run a society without any, government, without any rulers, without any managers.
No government.
And they exactly. And
So
they
you're against
scared-
government also.
Well, yeah, government is oppressive. The state is naturally oppressive.
Okay.
The state could never represent the interests of all of its citizens. That's
Okay.
impossible.
Then explain again from the common sense approach. Let's say I never lived in the USSR. I came from Mars. All I have is just common sense. Okay. Now, the point number one, when we talk about so-called collective ownership, by the way, that speaking of socialist experiments, the pilgrims, I mean, the first immigrants to our own shores, they experimented with that. And you know what happened, right?
To the pilgrims?
Yeah, the pilgrims. They almost died out.
Oh, yeah.
Then
But
they
the
decided.
Indians were practicing socialism too, and they've lived there for hundreds
Well,
of years.
it's Indians
I mean,
don't.
they did not have some type of government. They didn't have prisons. They didn't have money. They didn't
Well,
have capital.
did they have
They
kings?
collectively owned everything. They were one with the
Wait.
earth. They didn't have, these hierarchies.
Of course,
But
they didn't have hierarchy. Are you kidding me?
I mean, to a limited extent, they had
didn't have
elders.
chiefs?
They had chiefs, but
And
they
what
didn't
did-
have elected officials. They didn't have courts. They
No
didn't
elected.
have-
Of course not. No elected officials. And guess what happened?
Well, yeah,
At the time when in Europe, let's talk about I don't know, 16th, 17th, 15th century, when I mean, beyond just the elementary wheel, I mean, there was a civilization flourishing in Europe, right?
Yeah.
In let's say Inca Empire, and the Indians, they didn't even know what the wheel was. And when I was in Peru, for example, I asked the question for my tour guide. It's like, well, why, while in Europe we have developed civilization by those standards, in the Americas, they didn't even have the wheel. His response was, well, there was no need for the wheel because we had no roads. Isn't that laughable? The point that I'm trying to make is that there was no progress. They didn't even know what the wheel was. They didn't even use horse-drawn carriages. Nothing, no progress. And guess what? Speaking of human rights, so-called, you know, their tradition was to take people to the top of the pyramid, cut their chests open, take out the beating heart out, and throw thousands and thousands down the pyramids to propitiate the gods. You know the story, right?
Yeah.
And there were Incas, there were Olmecs, there were Aztecs, there were a whole bunch of different tribes. And what they were doing to each other? Killing each other, murdering each other. Not 1, not 10, not 100,000, no
They
courts.
were doing the same thing in Europe. Europe has always been in conflict with each other for centuries.
True, but on top of that, there was Magna Carta. You know, at that time, it was for the first time that you know, in Europe they decided that actually we don't have to be ruled by man. We have to be ruled by the laws. And it was a huge development in you know, human civilization. You would agree with that? I mean, I'm sure you know all of that.
No, I mean, yeah, that happened, but that wasn't exactly capitalism. I'm talking about industrial capitalism that developed after the 1800s. You know, when the government removed the peasants from their land, took it from them, and forced them into the slums of, you know, London and the industrialized towns so they could be wage slaves for the capitalists and make them money. That is what capitalism is. When people sell themselves to capitalists because they have no other means of survival and self-sustenance, that they must sell their labor power to the capitalists, where they in turn exploit their labor and build profit off of their labor. That is what capitalism is. It's the accumulation of capital through the exploitation of workers. That's
do you work? Do you have a job?
I had a job, yeah.
You have a job?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you go to work, you get paid, right?
Yeah.
So the amount of money that you paid really depends on your education, depends on your luck. By luck, I mean, you know, we're not equal. There was only one Einstein for the whole of humanity, right?
Yeah.
So how can you make people equal? And you say that there is a collective that is going, let's say, to run a business. When I met so many people, I'm a businessman, for example. You know, I kind of figured out how to run a business, even though I came from USSR. But there are a lot of people who are professionals, and you can tell them, you know, here's $1 million. Set up your own company. They would say, nah, I'm not a businessman. So the point I'm trying to make is that to run a business, even as a collective, people should have different skills.
Yeah.
So when you have different skills, right there is inequality. Some are managers and some are workers, right? Then what's going to happen is worker will say, wait a minute, why is the manager sitting in his office and I have to work my ass off, I don't know, digging earth, for example, right?
Yeah.
So right there, how do you say equality or collective running of an enterprise?
I mean, that's
how it's going to happen in practice,
well,
not in
that's
theory.
why I advocate communism, because, you know,
Communism?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Actual communism,
Oh, okay.
not USSR communism.
Oh, okay.
So when I mean communism, that means means of productions are collectively owned, and so too are what means of productions produce. That is for everyone. You can't completely measure the amount of work that people put in whatever job they do. I mean, there are so many, you know, extra factors that you have to consider, both physically and mentally.
But that's the theory. Let's say, okay, let's assume that two of us, you and I, we're a collective, okay? And let's assume that you're smarter than me. Let's assume, I mean, it's obvious because, you know, people are born. Like I said, there's only one Einstein. Obviously, Einstein is way smarter than you and me, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
the reason he's Einstein is because he got a gift. Right? Or let's say that there are painters, I don't know, whatever, take your favorite painter, favorite whatever, notable person. They're gifted, and they're gifted because, well, just happen to have in their genes, okay? So, you're smarter than me, and you're safe. And not just you say, but I have to figure out, let's say, for the ship to sail, I have to calculate the wind, I have to calculate the structure of the hull, the strength. There are so many things that should be involved in that. Now, to know how to do it, I have to have education, obviously, because I have no education, I would have no clue, how to build a ship so that it wouldn't sink. You don't want the ship to sink.
Yeah, but
so give me one more second. So, you're the one. You went to, let's assume in communism there are colleges. So you went to college, you learned all of that because you could. And I'm stupid. I mean, because just happened. I'm not good with math. I'm not good with reading. And I'm also lazy on top of that, okay? So now we're supposed to be equal in this commune, okay? You spent, let's say, 10 years studying, let's say, the resistance of materials, studying, all that is involved in the, let's say, construction of a ship. Okay? I know nothing about it. Wouldn't you expect to be, being remunerated, paid a little more than me?
Well,
if I say, wait a minute, we're a commune, come on, man. You get the $100 and I get $100. And I didn't go to school a day. I'm done. Okay. Your response.
So, that's kind of a straw man argument. To say that people are born stupid and some people are born smart is completely ridiculous. People can be educated on to say how to build a ship. Everybody can learn to do that.
Have you met a person who is not good at math?
Yeah, that's possible. But people can still learn these things. And
but if I'm bad, I can't.
Everybody is... An Einstein is, a 1 in a million person, but that's a completely different thing than, say, building, structures or something like that. It's a completely different thing.
Okay.
Now, if everything is in abundance, if everything is possible,
but how
why is there a need to get more and more? What more could you want?
Okay, but
for what reason?
Okay, well,
if you want more and more stuff, it's greed. What do you need greed. More things for?
Okay, fine.
If you have everything at your disposal in a communist society.
Okay, fine. Let's talk about the basics. And by the way, when you talk about the communist, so-called communist society, I assume that you talk about building it from scratch. Like, you're landed in an island where there is no civilization. Yes, there is abundance of resources, but you have to develop them. And the second thing, I'll get to them in a second, but as far as education is concerned, let's take your argument. Let's say that you're right, that everybody can become an engineer. Every single person.
I didn't exactly say that.
But let's assume you're right. Essentially, you're saying there isn't such a thing as stupid people and not stupid people. So let's say you're an engineer and I'm an engineer. Okay. So to build the ship, like the one which is not the contemporary ship, it's easier to build than let's say aircraft carriers for sure. To build the ship, they have to be engineers on the one hand. But on the other hand, they have to be a whole bunch of blue-collar employees to cut wood, to make steel and stuff like that. But everybody's an engineer. Why should I work as a steel worker? But I'm an engineer.
You're thinking like an elitist. You're saying I'm better than everybody else, so why should I work with these peasants and do these type of things? That's a wrong way to think about it.
Okay, let me do it in reverse. Let's say there are no engineers. There are only steel workers. The brotherhood of the steel workers. Who's going to design the ship?
You're kind of confusing the message.
I'm not confusing the message. I'm trying to get to the bottom.
You're thinking that people are not, that engineers are not going to be in abundance, or that they're not.
They're not going to be equal. That's my point. That's what I'm getting to.
But
they're not going to be equal.
Well, they're not equal, of course not. They do
communism.
Things.
So in communism, you assume that there will be inequality right there.
No, it's not in an inequality in, say, a monetary sense or a material sense. They're not they're not. I mean, they are equals in a material sense in a communist society, but mentally no one is. Everyone is different. To say that everyone is equal is, you know, like we're all homogenous beings, and you know.
So we're not.
We're not.
We're not. Good. Okay.
But
so with that, I agree.
Monetarily and
Yes.
you know materially, we are equals.
We are
Everything
equal. Okay.
in society is in abundance. Everyone has access to it.
But how?
It's shared.
But how come is that when you go, let's say, I know, to Africa, to Nigeria, which has tons of oil, why people are so dirt poor?
Because
there's abundance
That's exactly
because of
why.
capitalism.
Because the United States and Europe has been exploiting Africa for centuries. They have stolen millions, billions of resources from Africa. They have imposed all of those countries, all of those borders they have manufactured through imperialism. That's how that happened. Same thing with South America.
Really?
Third, this is how capitalism, this is how the West developed.
But
see, in a what you would call a free market society, what is supposed to happen is businesses are supposed to compete without any interference from the government and stuff like that.
Free market.
But
I agree
that
with
is
that.
not what happened, and that's not how the United States or Europe developed. Because the state subsidized those costs, subsidized the losses. They took care of them. They took care of the corporations. They built the military to expand markets, to invade other countries, to steal their resources. In a sense, they intervened in the development of these corporations, these businesses. So it was no free market.
But
capitalism
you are for free market. Then we'll agree. I am for free market.
Well, I mean,
Free market capitalism.
there can never be a free market. It's impossible.
There have to be some regulations for sure, but there was kind of almost free market. You know, for men, there is an interesting documentary running on the History Channel, Men Who Built America. It's fascinating, fascinating. You know, J.P. Morgan, Dale Carnegie, Rockefeller. Those were the men.
They didn't build anything.
Well,
They
exploited
the workers, and the workers built things, but
now,
they didn't.
Now, who's gonna create businesses? There will be no businesses in communism. I mean, what's your vision of communism? How is it gonna materialize in practice, not in theory? I mean, coming from USSR, you can imagine a third of our curriculum was about communism. We even had a study called Marx.
What?
Marx. We had to study Marx. We had
studied actual.
Of course, for Das Kapital, we had to read it. Absolutely. We had a course called Scientific Communism. We had a course. The only course that I failed was Political Economy because I just couldn't put it together. I understand politics. I understand the economy, political economy. I just couldn't get it. Otherwise, I was basically straight A student. You know, scientific communism. Well, I had to pass. So the point I'm trying to make is that, well, here's the theory, but how do you implement it in practice? It has never been implemented. How come is that this theory is more than 150 years old, and yet it has never succeeded? I mean, maybe you would think that there's something wrong with the theory?
No, that's in part, well, first, communist societies have existed long before any of the European states have existed. Humanity is over 10,000 years old. The modern state developed, in 3000 BC in Egypt. So to say that communism has never happened, that's false.
Was there communism
There have been
in
stateless societies in Africa, in Latin America, in the Americas.
Why didn't they succeed? Assuming that they existed.
Well,
of course they didn't, but
they were interrupted by, the Westerners coming and spreading disease and genocide to them.
You're talking about 3,000 years ago.
I'm giving you an example first off, saying communism has existed before.
Really?
Now, industrialized communism is something else. That's when, we have machinery to build, cars and houses and et cetera, et cetera. Now, like I'm returning back to my example of Spain. It was, in a sense, a communist society. Things were collectively owned, things were collectively, shared and collectively made without any type of, hierarchical leadership, telling people what to do and, being paid unequally. There was none of that. But the reason why communism hasn't taken root is because, one, the capitalist, Western democracies, so-called democracies, are extremely powerful. And they do work to crush those movements.
Democracies, so you're against democracy? You're saying that democracy is powerful. Now you really confuse me.
No. I'm saying...
So it's a bad thing?
The Westerners have never been a democracy. I mean, in a democracy, you would represent the needs of the people. That does not exist here.
Really?
Our government does not represent the needs of the people at all.
But you're against the government, period.
Well, yeah.
You said
government
so against the government. What about courts? What about the police? How is that going to work in communism? There will be no police, no courts, nothing?
I mean, you have to look
no
at
regulations?
What causes crime.
Yes.
Crime is caused by economic inequality.
Really?
Yes. It's
really?
It's through lack of resources.
Really?
Exactly.
You never knew...
I'm not saying that there won't be murderers or rapists or anything like that in a communist society, but there would be extremely small compared to what we have now.